Hi everyone, I'm Chris with National Parents Organization. Today I am here with Jessica and Rachel from the Center for Policy Research. They've got some exciting stuff to talk about. There's a new report out that is a policies and programs affecting fathers, a state-by-state report, and they're here to talk about that. Excited to hear about what they're doing with that report. There's a lot of great information in it. So Jessica and Rachel, thanks for coming on the show today.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. The report, Policies and Programs Affecting Fathers, a state-by-state report, was generated by the Center for Policy Research, the nonprofit research organization that Rachel and I work for. It's based in Denver and been around for 40 years. And we've done a lot of projects dealing with child support and parenting time and fatherhood, and efforts to try to make the child support program and parenting time system more equitable and more, do a better job of engaging fathers with their children. And this report outlines or identifies some key policies in 10 areas of public life that include child support and family law and responsible fatherhood. And it provides some state-by-state information on the status of policy in different states. And it sort of gives a little bit of a read across the nation about where fathers stand on terms of policy and practice that affects their connection with children. And it offers a little bit of a baseline of where we are now and what more progressive policies look like in some states relative to others, and areas that can be improved, and perhaps research that could be done to look at the impact of policies on families and father-child relationships and child outcomes. So that's the purpose of this state-by-state report. And we love for people to download it. It's available free online. It also has chapters that deal with child welfare. And what else do we have, Rachel?
So the 10 areas of public life that each have their own chapter are child support, child welfare, criminal justice, early childhood, education, employment, family law, food and housing, health and mental health, and responsible fatherhood. And then we also have an introductory and a conclusion chapter. So altogether, 12 chapters that, like Jessica said, are available to download either individually or as one combined PDF.
Right. And this was done as part of our work with the Responsible Research and Practice Network, which is a national network to highlight research and practice ideas dealing with fathers and fatherhood. And we have a particular focus on low-income fathers and never married fathers, because in many ways they are not covered by family law. Married and divorced fathers are covered by family law, but it's murkier and more challenging for fathers who were never married to the mothers of their children to often to gain access to children and their children when relationships dissolve, and become engaged with their children and maintain relationships. So that's we've prioritized this more disadvantaged, challenged population.
And just to provide a bit more context on where we get the data for the report, so we rely on publicly available data from a variety of sources, so including laws and multiple policy areas that are tracked on the National Conference of State Legislators website, looking at child support policies that are recorded on the Intergovernmental Reference Guide that's maintained by the Office of Child Support Enforcement, looking at data from federal agencies such as the Children's Bureau and the Department of Labor, and then publications in specific policy areas released by organizations like the National Parents Organization, the National Healthy Start Association. And then we also did some original data collection, which included reviewing websites for state agencies. So looking at like Department of Corrections, Department of Health websites, and then also contacting some state informants by email in order to just like update and clarify some published information, while also conducting interviews with experts in some policy areas to help identify potential data sources and potential indicators to look at. Like Jessica said, we were really interested in looking at fathers, but when measures for fathers were unavailable, we looked at indicators for adult and non-elderly men. And furthermore, just for some policy areas, like education, for example, a lot of examples and measures had to really just focus on undereducated youth and non-elderly adults as a whole, because breakdowns on participation and outcome for men versus women just were not available. So we tried to draw on measures and information related to fathers specifically when we could, but the report also just kind of shows areas where there is not that information available and that information has not been summarized or captured. So it provides that insight as well.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of information in this report, and I'm just reading through it here, and it's really nice how you have, each one of these sections, and you sort of explain what you're looking at in that particular section, and then there's a state-by-state breakdown. There's a table for each one of these things, and it talks specifically about the state. So,
Right.
when you want to advocate for better outcomes in these states, you can go look and see exactly, what your state is doing compared to other states.
Right.
So is there, I really like that, because a lot of times when we advocate, the legislators will ask you, well, what are other states doing? And this gives you kind of a
Exactly.
handy guide to just really go and say, well, here's what all the other
Exactly.
states are doing. So with that, I want to ask, is there sort of, and I know this may be a hard question to answer because it's probably all over the board, but were there areas where states are doing exceptionally well and maybe model legislation for other states?
Well, there are some states that are further along than others, and it is complicated, as you alluded to. They're not consistently progressive or in every area down the line, so they'll be further along in one area and lag a little bit more laggard in others. In general, some of the states that have been, historically more restrictive and less generous with low-income custodial parents and children, those that have not opted to expand Medicare, those that have lower minimum wages and other sorts of things, are also have less progressive policies in the child support arena. They have lower self-support reserves or low-income adjustments in their child support guidelines. They're more apt to charge higher interest on unpaid child support. They tend to have less generous pass-through policies, be less apt to compromise child support debt that accumulates. They have fewer work programs for fathers or non-custodial parents in the child support system who are unemployed or underemployed. So they tend to follow some patterns that are of policy that's less generous and less supportive of low-income people in general. And sadly, that's also racial minorities, although we didn't have the data to really look at differences by race and ethnic group, but I suspect that would fall along those lines as well.
Yeah, I've interviewed other researchers, for the social media here for National Parents Organization, and one thing that's come up time and time again is that there's in a lot of cases the data just isn't available to get down into the
Right.
specifics when you get between sometimes like moms and dads, right? There's more
Right.
research about moms than there is about dads, and there's less data to pull
Exactly.
from, and it makes some of this stuff a little bit difficult.
It is. It is. They're, in a lot of these programs, they are, they're required. There are certain data elements that are required, and those tend to get filled in. And then there are other fields in program databases that are not required, and they don't get filled in. And so guess what? If you don't require this to be collected, it doesn't get collected. And that is very, very challenging. For example, in the home visiting field, and we have, we've invested so much in home visiting programs, and they're so important, but there is no measure that home visiting programs are required to keep that takes into account father participation in a home visit or attempts to engage father in home visits. It just doesn't exist. And there was a proposal to make that a required field in future, as a condition for funding, and then it was withdrawn, so it didn't happen. So I do think a first step is trying to keep track of father engagement, father involvement, and build our level of awareness and knowledge in all of these areas. And this exercise that we've done in this report certainly pointed to the need to do that more consistently.
And was that the genesis behind starting this report in the first place?
Well, in some ways, yeah. We wanted to know, where does everyone stand? Where do the states stand? And we know in certain areas when there's measurement and tracking over time, there's some hope and opportunity for improvement. We've seen that, in the Annie E. Casey Foundation, for example, for the last 20 years has been putting out an annual kids count data book. And it looks at all the states and on certain indicators of child well-being. And you can see from year to year, they can track progress and the lack of progress thereof. And so that's been very, very helpful in sort of nudging states and moving the dialogue and getting policymakers and legislators and others to sort of be aware of how are we doing on child well-being. We just don't have that kind of compilation or attention to fathers in the child support arena. Certain things are tracked very, very carefully. The Child Support Agency tracks the number of orders that are established. They track child support collections very closely. They track arrears and the generation of arrears on an annual basis. And not surprisingly, because when we track things and measure things, we're aware of them, we've seen tremendous improvement in those measures. But we don't track other things that are very important for father engagement. And we were hoping to build awareness of these other items and focus attention on that and begin the process of tracking and following trends in these more positive policies across the country.
So are there plans to, do this report again in the future at some time?
Well, that's a great question, because we did this actually totally on our own dime. Center for Policy Research used its own internal resources to do this. The Fatherhood Research and Practice Network was created through a federal grant from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation from 2013 to 2019. But then the grant ended and it was not renewed. So since then, we have been supporting it and keeping it going with internal resources. And this was a huge effort. And frankly, right now, it's a little daunting, the idea of really without external support of redoing it. It does need to get redone because, as you know, policy happens all the time and things get out of date almost as soon as you write them. Legislation comes through and the minimum wage changes. A state will drop interest charges that it was levying on unpaid arrears, as Illinois did last year, because it discovered, guess what? It's inequitable. It disproportionately affects low-income people of color. So they dropped it. So policy is constantly changing. And so we're always sort of behind, out of date. And it does need to be updated. We'd love to be able to redo this. But right now, we don't have immediate plans to do that.
But we are keeping a tab on flagging anything that comes across. So Jessica had mentioned the minimum wage changes, saving those articles, keeping kind of like a running tally of update information that we see and kind of keeping a pulse on what is going on.
Well, that's fantastic. And I just looking through the report here, it's got lots and lots of numbers in it, but numbers can be misleading, right? Depending on how you interpolate them. I do like, though, how you have in the report, you do have suggestions on improvement on a broad basis. And that really, I think, brings home, what states can do. And instead of just look at the numbers and trying to move something a percentage or two, they can look and see, what changes can they make to policies to really affect some change.
Right.
And
go ahead.
And within each chapter, in addition to presenting those numbers and those tables, breaking down the states, we provide some context, cite research, and explain why we're looking at, the role and importance of fathers, especially low-income fathers, being impacted by the child support system, or thinking about, the role of fathers' health and the research that ties that into children's outcomes. So we frame it within each chapter, within, showing the context and citing relevant research. And like you said, then at the end of each chapter, summarizing and adding some suggestions and conclusions.
So
and there are positive changes. I mean, in Pennsylvania, just 2 months ago, created through the legislature a bipartisan unanimous decision to create a fatherhood commission, statewide fatherhood commission. And, that was the result of several years of effort by a local fatherhood organization that worked with the legislature to build awareness of the need to promote father engagement, and it came to pass. So positive changes can happen, do happen. It just takes like all policy or many policy changes, a lot of persistence and continued effort.
Rachel, I want to talk a little bit. You'd written a blog article for us on National Parents Organization, and what's been the reaction to that? What are people saying about the report?
So Like you mentioned, I did a blog post to the National Parents Organization introducing the report, summarizing some similar information that Jessica and I are talking about today, and particularly talking about our family law chapter, as we thought that would be of interest and relevant to people reading. Overall, we've had a lot of really positive feedback with the report. People have been really interested in the whole report overall, but especially maybe one or two chapters that are really relevant to the work or the research that they do. So we've been trying to share the word, get it out to different audiences, because people might find different information that's applicable for them. Again, depending on what topic they're working in or doing research in, if they're really focused on their state or maybe a couple states surrounding them. But we've had really positive feedback. And again, like Jessica mentioned, this is just something that this information wasn't being compiled and summarized in this kind of large scale way. So people have been happy to be able to have this information and to be able to get a sense of what's going on nationally and then to put their state in that context. So we've spoken with some people about more, their state particularly, but also just on this broad conversation like we're having today.
Well, that's great. And, as you guys were putting this report together, was there any bit of information or anything that came out of the data that really sort of surprised you?
Well, I was surprised actually that the TANF surplus TANF funds, or funds that are not allocated for public assistance, are available for a variety of purposes, including promotion of two-parent households and father engagement. And I was surprised to learn that the unspent level of TANF balance is very, very high. It amounts to I think it was 5.2 billion in 2020. It's doubled over the past decade, and that many states, on average, states spent 0.05%. I mean, 0.5% on fatherhood and two-parent family formation, and that it seems like that's a very obvious source of revenue that could be tapped to promote more services and interventions that would translate to or support father engagement. So that was surprising to me. And in many states, there's no allocation of funds for that purpose at all. So that was, I guess, an eye opener. And I think an area that states need to look at. They need to work with their state TANF directors. There's lots of competition for TANF funds. There are many worthwhile causes, but fatherhood and father engagement should be one of those worthwhile causes, and that should be tapped more fully.
So is that money that's allocated by the state and then not used, not claimed basically by somebody in a welfare program?
Well, yeah, it is. It's the TANF funds are allocated to the states and based on population, and it is just not otherwise committed for public assistance. But there are many other types of services and programs that it does go to support. It's a kind of a formula grant, and there are broad congressionally generated purposes, and purpose 3 and 4 have fatherhood potential to involve the delivery of services for father engagement. And that has not been as fully exploited, I think, as it could be.
And that's all federal funds that we're talking about with TANF,
Yes.
right?
Yes, but but every state gets an allocation. So spending is discretionary at the state level. I mean, of course, we know that many changes and policies do involve federal law and are federally driven. But I think we've realized through doing this exercise that there are a lot of things that states can do on their own. And in fact, it may be a lot more productive to work at the state level. We've seen the kind of gridlock we have at the federal level, and but states can be more nimble in a lot of ways in changing policy and being more responsive and being more flexible. And I think that's another thing that surprised me, of just how much variation there is and how much flexibility states do have. And, even with new funding through ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan, and discretionary funds available in the Infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act. Those are all decisions that can be made at the state level. They have a lot of latitude at how they spend money, and they can choose to use it to support more equity and support fathers so that they can be better providers and better engaged with their families. And they can choose to beef up workforce development, which is a huge need for fathers, especially low-income fathers. That's up to the states. And so I think that's another realization we came to, that states matter and states can do things, whether, it's the federal minimum wage hasn't changed in decades, but states, when minimum wages have changed, states have introduced their own earned income tax credit. States can do these things. And I'm hoping that they'll be inspired to do that, to be more generous and more expansive.
Well, we do too, and we're about out of time. But is there anything else you want to talk about before we close this up?
No, just wanted to encourage everyone to go check out the report. I believe the link will be made available in the show notes, but it's on www.frpn.org, and you can find all the chapters and the full report there.
And remind us again where everybody can find you guys online. So you have the website, and assume you have some Facebook, social media stuff.
Well, we are at the Center for Policy Research.org and CPR. Let's see. It's www.centerforpolicyresearch.org. Rachel, what else?
We are also on LinkedIn, I know, but could definitely be inspired by this to ramp up our other social media presence.
Yes. We're busy producing reports and not as much on probably not as much on social media as we should be.
Well, we'll go ahead and put links to all those places down in the show notes, so people can find you very easily. And I really, Jessica and Rachel, really want to thank you both for coming on and talking to us today. This is such an important topic, and you guys have done a fantastic job of putting this report together. There's a ton of information there. Highly encourage everybody to go out and download it and look at your state and look at comparison states and really dive into the data, because there is a bunch of data here, and it's such an important topic that we need to get that information out there. So again, thank you for putting that together and for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, and have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.